The air in the Two Forks saloon was thick with smoke and desperation. Cash McGraw sat at a corner table, the last of his money forming a sad little pile in front of him. Outside, the Montana wind howled, a perfect match for the storm in his gut. His family's ranch was gone, lost to the bank 6 months back. All he had left was his truck, his gear, and a hollow feeling where his future used to be. He was here for one last stupid roll of the dice. Poker. The cards had never loved him much, but hope was a stubborn weed. Across from him sat Vance Crowe. Vance wasn't a rancher. He was a foreman for a big corporate outfit, a man made of sharp angles and colder smiles. He liked to win, but he loved to see the other guy lose even more. Cash watched his last few dollars slide across the scarred tabletop toward Vance. The taste of defeat was familiar, bitter as old coffee. He went to push back from the table, his bones aching with failure. "That it, McGraw?" Vance's voice was a slow drawl, meant to needle. "Quitting time? Seems about right for you." Cash's jaw tightened. He had nothing left to bet. Vance smirked, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "Tell you what, I'm feeling generous. I see you're fond of that saddle you're wearing out." He nodded toward the old, beautifully tooled saddle Cash had carried in. Cash's father's saddle. The last piece of home. "I've got a horse out back," Vance continued. "Won him in a deal myself. Beautiful bay gelding. Strong, but he's broken in the head. Spooks at his own shadow. Tries to bite. Won't let a soul near him with a saddle. Useless. I'm going to send him to the glue factory next week. I'll bet that worthless animal against your saddle." One hand. The offer was an insult. A broken horse for a piece of Cash's history. The other men at the table chuckled. Cash looked at his father's saddle on the empty chair. A memory flashed of his dad teaching him to ride, his hands guiding Cash's small ones on the reins. That saddle was a ghost of a better time. What good was a ghost if you had nothing to feed it? A reckless, tired anger burned in his chest. Maybe it was all meant to be lost. "Deal," Cash said, the word rough in his throat. The cards were dealt. Cash's heart hammered against his ribs. He peeked at his hand. A pair of nines. Not great. Vance bet aggressively, his confidence a visible cloak. Cash, with nothing left to protect, matched him. The final card was dealt. Vance's smile didn't waver, but Cash saw a flicker in his eyes. Cash looked at his own final card. A third 9. He laid them down. 3 of a kind. Vance's smile vanished. He threw his cards down in disgust. A weak pair of jacks. For a second, pure rage flashed in Vance's eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by a cold, amused snort. "Well, I'll be. Congratulations, McGraw. You just won yourself a world of trouble. He's in the last stall out back. Don't say I didn't warn you." Cash scooped up the empty victory, his fingers trembling. He grabbed his saddle and walked out, the laughter of the men following him into the chill night. Behind the saloon was a ramshackle, lean-to that passed for a stable. The smell of neglect hit him, first old hay and fear. He moved past stalls until he reached the last one, darker than the rest. In the gloom, he could make out the shape of a horse. A fine, strong bay gelding, just as Vance described. But the animal was pressed into the far corner, its body trembling. As Cash's shadow fell across the stall, the horse let out a sharp, terrified snort and threw its head up, the whites of its eyes gleaming in the dark. It wasn't a mean look. It was the pure, wild look of a creature that expected pain. "Easy now," Cash whispered, his heart sinking. "Easy, boy." He slowly unlatched the stall door. The horse shrank back, muscles coiled tight enough to snap. Cash saw fresh scrapes on its legs, a too prominent rib cage. This wasn't just a difficult horse. This was an animal that had been hurt deeply and often. He fumbled with the halter, his movements feeling clumsy. The horse danced away, blowing hard. It took 10 minutes of soft, useless talk just to get the halter on. Leading him out was another battle. The horse planted its feet, then lunged forward, nearly yanking Cash's arm from its socket. They did a sad, stumbling dance into the alley. It was then Cash felt it a prickling on the back of his neck. He was being watched. He turned. Under the single, flickering yellow light of the alley's end stood a woman. She was wrapped in a dark wool coat, her long black hair loose around her shoulders. She wasn't from the saloon. She stood perfectly still, her eyes not on him, but locked on the horse. Her face was a mask of something so intense it made Cash pause a deep, aching sorrow mixed with a fire that burned right through the cold night. Her gaze finally shifted to him. It wasn't angry. It was measuring, imprinting. She looked at him as if memorizing every detail of his face, his worn jacket, the way he held the lead rope. For a long moment, they just stood there in the silence. The only sound the horse's panicked breathing and the distant jangle of the saloon piano. Then, without a word, she turned and melted into the darkness beyond the circle of light. Gone as quickly as she'd appeared, Cash was left alone, holding the lead rope of a broken animal, the ghost of that woman's stare clinging to him. He had won the bet. But as he looked at the trembling, beautiful creature beside him and felt the echo of that silent, powerful gaze, he knew, with a cold certainty, that he had stepped into a story that was not his own. And it was only just beginning. The next few days at Cash's rented patch of land were a slow kind of torture. The little cabin was cold, and the corral felt too big and empty, except for the horse that filled it with its fear. Cash called him Ghost, because the animal moved like one silent, tense, and always disappearing into the shadows of his own mind. Cash tried everything he knew. He moved slow. He talked in a low voice. He offered grain from a flat palm. Ghost would watch him with those wide, dark eyes, ears flicking like nervous birds. Sometimes he'd stretch his neck to sniff, his breath warm and quick. But the moment Cash lifted a hand to touch his neck, Ghost would explode. He'd spin away, kicking up dirt or rear up, his front legs cutting the air like warnings. The old saddle, the one he'd won the bet with, sat on the fence rail like a joke. Just the sight of it made Ghost's skin twitch. Cash tried to introduce a simple blanket. It was a disaster. The gentle toss of the fabric over the horse's back sent him into a blind panic. Crashing into the rails, his sides heaving by the fourth day, Cash was out of ideas and almost out of hope. He stood leaning on the corral, his forehead pressed against the rough wood. The shame was a heavy coat he couldn't take off. His father, a patient man with horses, would have been ashamed of him. Maybe Vance was right. Maybe some animals were just too far gone. The thought of giving up made him sick, but the thought of continuing this dance of fear and failure made him tired down to his bones. That's when he saw the dust cloud coming down his long, dirt drive. A beat-up, older model truck, not a ranch vehicle. It pulled to a stop outside the gate, and the woman from the alley stepped out. Up close, she was even more striking. She had a calmness about her, a stillness that was the exact opposite of Ghost's panic. She wore jeans and a simple jacket, and her hair was in a single long braid. She didn't smile. She just walked to the corral fence and looked at the horse. Ghost, for the first time, didn't run. He stood on the far side, head high, but he didn't bolt. He let out a soft, questioning nicker. "His name is Mahui," the woman said. Her voice was clear and quiet. "It means little spirit in my language." Cash was too surprised to speak for a second. "You know him?" "He was born on my family's land," she said, her eyes never leaving the horse. "My grandfather gave him to me when he was a foal. 6 months ago, men came onto our land at night. They took 3 horses from the upper pasture. He was one of them. Cash felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Stolen. She nodded. I tracked them for 2 days. The trail led toward the county line, and then to the railhead where the big ranches shipped their cattle. I asked questions. I was told a man named Vance Crow had acquired a fine bay gelding. Finally, she looked at Cash, and then I saw you leading him away from the saloon. All the defensiveness in Cash rose up. He'd won the horse fair and square, even if the bet was a bad one. That horse was all he had. I didn't steal him. I won him in a card game. I believe you, she said, and her calm honesty disarmed him. But that does not change where he came from, or who he belongs to. Cash crossed his arms. So what? You're here to take him? Just like that? No, she said. She gestured toward Mahui. Look at him. You cannot take a spirit that is broken. He would not survive the journey home in this state. She paused, studying Cash's worn face, the frustration in his posture. You are trying to gentle him the way you are taught. It will not work. His fear is not in his mind. It is in here. She placed a hand over her own heart. What do you suggest I do, then? Cash asked, his voice edged with defeat. I suggest you let me help, she said. Cash laughed, a short, bitter sound. Why would you do that? For him, not for you. She said it plainly, without malice. I will come for 1 hour each day. I will show you how to speak to him. If, after 2 weeks, I can ride him calmly from this corral, you will give him to me. I will bring the proof from my grandfather, the tribal council mark. If I cannot ride him, he is yours. It was a wild offer. A gamble even stranger than the poker game. Cash looked at the horse, a beautiful animal he could not reach. He looked at this woman who knew the horse's true name. His pride screamed at him to say no, to fight for the only thing he owned. But his father's voice, deep in his memory, whispered something else. Asterisk sometimes. Son, the bravest thing a cowboy can do is admit he's wrong. Asterisk, he took a deep breath. The knot in his stomach loosened, just a little. All right, he said. 2 weeks. What's your name? Kaya, she said. Cash. She gave a small nod, then turned back to the corral. She didn't open the gate. Instead, she simply climbed up and sat on the top rail. She took a small bundle of something from her pocket. It looked like dried herbs, and began to hum, very softly. It was a low, tuneless sound, more like the wind than a song. Mahui lifted his head. His ears swiveled forward. He took 1 cautious step toward her, then another. He stopped about 10 feet away, watching her. Cash held his breath. For a full hour, Kaya just sat there. She didn't look at the horse directly. She didn't try to coax him. She just was there, present and calm, filling the space with her quiet hum. And the horse, for the first time since Cash had known him, lowered his head. He didn't eat. He didn't come closer. He just stood, listening, his body slowly losing its razor-sharp tension. When the hour was up, Kaya slid down from the fence. She looked at Cash. Tomorrow, do not bring the saddle. Do not bring a rope. Just sit with him. Let him remember what peace feels like. She got into her truck and left. Cash stood alone in the sudden quiet. He looked at the horse. The animal looked back, and for a fleeting second, Cash thought he saw something new in its deep, dark eyes. It wasn't trust yet, but it was the absence of a war. It was a ceasefire. And for now, that was more than he'd had in a very long time. The rhythm of the days changed. Cash's old life had been governed by the harsh clang of chores and the heavy weight of what was lost. Now, his days were measured in quiet hours and soft sounds. He kept his promise. He didn't bring a saddle or a rope into the corral. Instead, in the cold, clear mornings, he would simply climb the fence and sit on the top rail, just as Kaya had done at first. Mahui Cash was trying to think of him by his real name, now would watch him from a distance, suspicious. But slowly, the horse began to graze closer to where Cash sat. Cash learned to be still, to let his own thoughts settle like dust. He noticed things. How the horse favored his left hind leg just a little. How a certain bird flying overhead would make his skin twitch. He was learning the map of the animal's fear. Every afternoon, Kaya's truck would rattle down the drive. She never came empty-handed. One day it was a handful of wild apple mint. Another day it was a soft brush made of twisted grass. She showed Cash how to hold the herbs on his flat palm, letting the horse choose to come and take them. She taught him to move not in straight lines toward the animal, but in slow arcs, which felt less like a threat. One afternoon, she brought a small woven bag. "Turn around," she said to Cash. He did, puzzled. He heard her rustling, then a soft, rhythmic sound. A gentle shaking, like rain on dry leaves. He glanced over his shoulder. Kaya held a simple rawhide rattle, decorated with faded blue beads. She was shaking it softly, walking in a wide circle around the horse, who stood watching, his head tilted with curiosity, not fear. "What is that for?" Cash asked later, as they shared a cup of coffee by his cabin steps. "It is a sound he knew as a colt," Kaya said. "My grandfather used one when he worked with the young horses. It is a good sound, a familiar sound. His body remembers it, even if his mind is scared." Cash sipped his coffee, thinking. "My dad, he just used a firm voice and a steady hand. That's all I was ever taught." Kaya nodded. "That works for a horse who trusts the world. This one, the world has hurt him. You must show him a different world." The next day, Cash tried something. He didn't try to touch Mahui. Instead, he started talking. Not the low, gentle talk he'd used before, but just talking. He talked about the weather. He complained about the price of feed. He told the horse about his old dog, who had died 3 years back. He spoke about losing the ranch, the empty feeling in the house after the bank took it. He just let the words spill out, meaningless and meaningful all at once. His voice a steady, calm stream. The horse listened. He came closer that day than he ever had, his nose just a foot from Cash's boot, breathing in the scent of his story. The trust built slowly, like water wearing down stone. Cash began to see the horse's true personality. There was a curiosity there, a cleverness. One morning, Mahui nudged the gate latch with his nose, as if trying to figure it out. Cash found himself laughing, a real laugh that felt strange in his throat. The wall between him and Kaya began to soften too. Their conversations stretched beyond the horse. She told him about studying wildlife biology, about wanting to bridge the world of her tribe's knowledge with the science she learned in college. He told her about the simple dream of his family's ranch, how it wasn't about being rich, but about being self-sufficient, about knowing every inch of your own land. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in oranges and purples, they were in the corral. Kaya was gently running the grass brush over Mahuhi's shoulder. The horse stood perfectly still, his eyes half closed. Cash leaned on the fence, watching. "Can I ask you something?" Cash said, the marks on his flank. "The old ones that look like lines, or those from Vance?" Kaya's hand paused. She took a slow breath. "No, those are older. From when he was a very young horse, before he was mine." She didn't offer more, and Cash didn't push. The silence held a new weight. A few days later, the breakthrough came. It wasn't dramatic. Cash was in the corral, and Mahui walked right up to him and lowered his head. pressing his forehead gently against Cash's chest. He stood there, his weight leaning in, his breath warm through Cash's shirt. Cash froze, then slowly raised a hand and placed it on the horse's neck. The solid warmth of him, the steady heartbeat under his palm. It wasn't a horse being controlled. It was a horse asking for comfort. Cash felt a lump rise in his throat. He closed his eyes and just stood there, sharing the quiet. Kaya saw it from her truck as she arrived. She stopped and watched, a small, deep smile touching her lips. She didn't interrupt. That night, they found the fresh scars. Cash was brushing the horse's belly, and Mahuhi flinched. Cash bent down, parting the coarse hair. There, hidden, were a series of short, jagged cuts, recently healed, but still angry. Looking. Kaya knelt beside him. Her face, usually so calm, went pale with a quiet fury. "A wire," she whispered, her fingers hovering over the marks. Someone wrapped a tight wire around him. To punish him. To make him stand still. Her hand balled into a fist. This is Vance's work. This is what he calls breaking. Cash felt a hot anger boil in his own gut. He thought of Vance's smug face at the poker table. Useless. He looked at the intelligent, gentle creature in front of him, who had learned to trust again despite this cruelty. The debt he felt shifted. It was no longer about winning a bet. It was about setting something right. The peace of the evening was shattered the next day. Vance Crow's shiny truck roared up to the gate, kicking up a cloud of dust. He got out, two of his ranch hands looming behind him. He sauntered up to the corral, where Cash and Kaya were working. "Well, look at this," Vance drawled, his eyes scraping over Kaya before landing on Cash. "Heard you got yourself a helper, McGraw. And the horse don't look so crazy no more." His smile was all teeth. "Turns out there was a misunderstanding about that poker game. I believe there was a marked card in the deck. Means the bet's void. I'll be taking my horse back now." Cash stepped forward, putting himself between Vance and the corral. "There was no marked card. You lost. He's not yours." Vance's smile vanished. "He's mine until I say he ain't, and I say this little arrangement here looks a lot like theft of my property." His eyes flicked to Kaya. "You involved in this, little lady? Maybe I should call the sheriff. Have him sort out who this horse really belongs to." Kaya stepped up beside Cash. She didn't say a word. She just looked at Vance, her gaze steady and unwavering like stone. She pulled out her phone, tapped the screen, and held it up. On it was a picture. A younger Kaya, her grandfather with a proud smile, and a gangly bay colt with a distinct star on its forehead, Mahui. The next photo was an official-looking tribal document with a seal. "The sheriff already has a copy of my theft report," Kaya said, her voice colder than the mountain stream. "From 6 months ago. With this photograph. You can explain to him how you acquired him." Vance stared at the phone, then at her, then at Cash. The bluff had been called. The anger in his eyes was real and dangerous now. He took a step closer, his voice a low growl. "This ain't over. You've made a big mistake, both of you." He spat on the ground, turned, and climbed back into his truck, roaring away in another cloud of dust. The quiet that followed was tense. Mahui had pressed himself against the far fence, trembling. The fear was back in his eyes. Cash looked at Kaya. The unspoken truth hung between them. Vance wasn't going to just go away. Their quiet world of healing had just been invaded. The 2-week bargain was almost up, but the real battle, they both knew, was just beginning. The dust from Vance's truck settled, but the threat hung in the air like a bad smell. The easy rhythm of the past 2 weeks was gone. Cash found himself looking over his shoulder, jumping at the sound of an engine. The peace they had built felt fragile, like thin ice over deep water. The deadline for the bargain arrived. Cash woke up that morning with a heavy heart. The day was bright and crisp, the sky a hard blue. He fed Mahui, who nudged his hand gently, looking for an apple slice. The horse was different now. His eyes were calm, his movements easy. The trust was there. A living thing between them. Kaya arrived just after noon. She didn't say anything about the test. She simply walked into the corral, a soft rope halter in her hand. Mahui walked right up to her and lowered his head. Cash's throat tightened. He knew what he was about to lose. But he also knew, deep down, that the horse was never truly his to keep. Kaya led the horse to the center of the corral. She didn't rush. She placed her hands on his back, leaning her weight into him. Then, with a smooth, graceful motion, she swung herself up onto his bare back. She didn't sit like a rider ready to command. She sat loosely, comfortably, as if she were just resting there. Mahui stood perfectly still. Then, at a soft click of her tongue, he began to walk. It wasn't a nervous walk. It was a calm, rolling gait. They moved together, as if connected by a single thought. Kaya guided him with the slightest touch of her knees, with the shift of her weight. They walked, then trotted, a smooth, flowing motion. The horse's ears were relaxed, swiveling to catch her quiet words. Cash watched, his arms crossed over the fence. He felt a painful mix of pride and loss. She had done it. She had healed the spirit he could only reach the edges of. This was her victory, and it was right. After a few minutes, Kaya slid down. She patted Mahui's sweaty neck and walked over to Cash. Her face was serious. "The bargain is done," she said. "I can ride him." Cash nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, you can." He looked past her at the horse. "He's yours. I'll help you load him?" "Wait," Kaya said. She took a deep breath. "I have been thinking. The law says he is mine. My heart says he is mine. But his spirit has made a choice. He has let you in. If I take him from you now, after all this, it would be another kind of theft. It would break the trust we just finished building." Cash stared at her, confused. "What are you saying?" "I am saying the papers will show he is my horse. The proof is there. But I am asking you to keep him here, to be his guardian." Hope, a feeling he'd buried months ago, flickered dangerously in Cash's chest. "I don't understand. My home is 2 hours' drive, up in the mountains," Kaya explained. "My land is good land, but it is remote. Vance is a coward, but he is an angry coward. If I take Mahui home alone, that long road is a dangerous place. Vance could easily cause an accident. Here, with you, he is stronger. And you have each other." Cash looked from her determined face to the watchful horse. "So, what then? We just share him? We become partners," Kaya said, the words sounding both strange and solid. "We finish what we started. We show people there is a better way to train a horse than with fear and wire. We use what you know of ranch work and what I know of an animal's heart. We build something new." It was a crazy, wild idea. It was also the first real future anyone had offered him since he lost everything. Before he could answer, the decision was made for them. That night, a sound woke Cash from a deep sleep. It was the shrill, terrified scream of a horse. He was on his feet in an instant, pulling on his boots, his heart hammering. He grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. The corral gate was swinging open. The corral was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, stabbed through him. "Mahui!" He yelled into the darkness. He heard the thunder of hooves fading into the distance, toward the rugged hills behind his land. He saw tire tracks in the soft dirt near the gate, not a truck, but the deeper cuts of a trailer. He was running for his own truck when headlights cut through the night. It was Kaya's truck, bouncing wildly down the drive. She skidded to a stop and jumped out, her face etched with fear. "I heard it on the scanner," she said, breathless. "Police radio. A trailer was reported speeding away from this area. It was Vance, I know it." Rage, pure and hot, flooded Cash's veins. This wasn't about a horse anymore. This was an attack. A violation. "Get in," he said, his voice rough. They drove in silence, following the faint, muddy tire tracks down a backcountry road Kaya knew. She directed him with short, sharp words. "Left here. Through that creek bed." Her knowledge of the land was sure and true. They finally spotted the trailer's taillights, disappearing into a narrow canyon used by hunters. "He's going to the old Miller place," Cash said, his hands tight on the wheel. "It's an abandoned ranch. Lots of old outbuildings. He'll think he can hide in there." They parked a mile down the road and went the rest of the way on foot, under a moon that gave little light. The cold air bit at their faces. They crept up to a ridge overlooking the decaying ranch. Below, in a pen made of rusted pipe, they saw him. Mahuhi, pacing frantically, trapped again. Vance and one of his men were standing by a truck, drinking from a bottle, laughing. The sound of their laughter carried on the cold wind. "We can't fight them," Cash whispered, his mind racing. "They're two big men. They'll just call the sheriff and lie." Kaya was silent, her eyes scanning the scene. She saw the other horses, maybe 10 of them, in a larger, adjacent pen. They were restless, stirred up by Mahui's fear. "We don't fight them," she said, a plan forming in her calm voice. "We remind them of their own nature." She pointed to the gate on the larger pen. It was held shut by a simple, heavy chain. "You create a distraction on the far side. Make a noise. When they go to look, I will open that gate." "Then what?" Cash asked. "Then the horses will do what horses do when they are scared and set free," she said. "They will run. And Vance will have a much bigger problem than one stolen horse." Cash nodded. It was risky, but it was the only play they had. He moved quietly through the scrub, circling wide. He found an old metal feed bucket. Taking a deep breath, he hurled it as far as he could into a pile of loose tin roofing. The clang-bang crash was terrifying in the silent night. What the hell was that? Vance's voice rang out. "Go check it out." Both men grabbed flashlights and jogged toward the noise, leaving the horses unattended. As soon as their lights were turned away, Kaya moved like a shadow. She slipped down the hill, reached the large pen, and with a grunt of effort, lifted the heavy chain off its post. She swung the gate wide open. For a second, nothing happened. The horses just looked at the open space. Then one bold Mare took a step. Then another. And then, as if a spell broke, the whole herd surged forward, pouring out of the pen in a wave of muscle and noise. They stampeded right past the smaller pen, their panic infecting Mahui, who whinnied SHR, ILLY. The noise brought Vance and his man running back, their flashlights swinging wildly. "No, get back. You idiots." Vance was screaming, but it was useless. The horses were a chaotic river flowing around them, kicking up dust and terror. In the confusion, Cash ran to the small pen. The gate was locked with a padlock. He didn't hesitate. He picked up a loose piece of fence post and brought it down on the rusty lock with all his strength. Once, twice. On the third hit, it shattered. He yanked the gate open. "Mahuhi, come on." The horse needed no second invitation. He bolted out, but instead of running wild, he skidded to a stop beside Cash, his sides heaving. "Go!" Cash slapped his rump, and the horse took off, blending with the shadows. Cash turned and ran back the way he came, meeting Kaya at the top of the ridge. They lay flat, watching the chaos below. Vance was in a fury, trying in vain to corral a few of the scattered horses, his precious trailer now a target for panicked animals kicking out at it. The sound of distant sirens began to wail. Someone must have heard the stampede and called it in. Kaya touched Cash's arm. "We go. Now." They crawled back to their truck, their hearts pounding, their clothes covered in dirt. They didn't speak until they were miles away, back on the main road. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving them shaky and exhausted. "Do you think he'll find his way home?" Cash asked, his voice quiet. Kaya looked out the window at the dark landscape. "He knows the way. Horses always know the way. We will wait for him at your corral." And they did. As the first gray light of dawn touched the eastern sky, a shape appeared at the edge of the pasture. It was Mahui, walking slowly, his head low with tiredness. He came straight to the corral gate, where they stood waiting. Cash opened the gate. The horse walked in, went straight to his water trough, and drank deeply. Then he came over and nudged Cash's shoulder, as if to say, "I am back." Kaya looked at Cash, the ghost of a smile on her tired face. "Partners?" she asked again. Cash looked at the horse, home and safe. He looked at the woman who had fought for him. He nodded, a solid, sure feeling settling in his chest for the first time in years. "Partners," he said. The days after the stampede were quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of before. It was the quiet of waiting. Cash and Kaya went about their work with Mahui, but their eyes kept drifting to the dirt road, expecting Vance's truck to come roaring back with a sheriff's car behind it. But it didn't. A week later, they found out why. A short article in the local paper mentioned that a foreman for the Big Sky Cattle Company, Vance Crow, had been let go. There was an ongoing investigation into improper livestock handling and trespassing. The rumor mill at the feed store said more, that the sheriff had found some of the whore,